Right now in Sudan, anarchist comrades are organizing in the middle of a war, repression, and displacement. The anarchist group in Sudan is building mutual aid, grassroots committees, and political education for survival and liberation. And they need our support. You can stand with them by making a one-time donation, holding your own fundraiser and sending the funds to the Open Collective, Support Sudanese Comrades, link in bio, or become a monthly supporter at that same Open Collective link. Every contribution strengthens their ability to keep resisting and caring for their people. Solidarity means action. Tap the link in our bio or in the show notes and support the anarchist group in Sudan today.
First questions we always like to ask is, who are you? And what was a young you like?
Ooh, hello. Thank you for having me here. Excited to be here. Long-time listener, first time caller. My name is Anastasia Bat Lilith. I'm an anarchist organizer from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a Jewish anarchist. I'm a zinester. Young me was unable to process their bodily feelings that they were trans. I was diving headfirst into the fantasy books. Fantasy books are my first love. How I fell in love with writing, which is what I still do now, thankfully. But that was, first sort of wet my teeth on like fantasy books and fostering my imagination. And for that, I'm really grateful, because that was a good foundation for the kind of imaginary work that I find important today. I also refer to myself as a Jewish anarchist because that's something that's very important to me, both of those things individually and together. But also, I really didn't like growing up Jewish. It was something I had a very resentful experience with, did not enjoy it whatsoever. If only little me had known and my parents had known that I had ADHD, and that was why I resented it more, like having to go to extra school when I could barely finish the real school. Getting treated for ADHD, man, that would have been very different. But my parents lived their entire lives without knowing, so it's good to be gentle to ourselves. I make zines. I like writing. I'm also one of the organizers for the Pittsburgh Jewish Zine Fest, which I'm really excited is happening again. Last year was the first year. It was really small. It was hosted inside and also partially outside the Big Idea, which is our local info shop and radical bookstore. And now we're having it at a moderately bigger venue at a punk DIY space, which we're really grateful for.
Hell yeah, that sounds so sick. I read the zine that you wrote, Teshuva. I've always had an affinity for a lot of Jewish anarchist texts and history, as much as being an anarchist historian and just loving anti-authoritarian history. I'm kind of curious what traditions or threads that you're pulling from, any figures or communities or moments that guide what you are doing or thinking through your work.
So this is my latest zine that I made, Teshuva, Provocations for Jewish Anarchism. I'm really grateful that you like it and people like it, because I worked on it through a very difficult, tumultuous time in my life. It was the beginning of 2025. It was bad for everybody I know who has some awareness of the state of the world. I come from a very assimilated background, so Yiddish wasn't something that I grew up speaking. Something I'm learning now as a conscious political choice that I'm trying to reconnect with. I'm very fortunate and lucky to say that I actually had a non-Zionist upbringing, not anti-Zionist, but not Zionist. Just being ignorant rather than being sort of led into this ethno-nationalist project that just sort of is here in the room, the elephant in the room that no one talks about. Birthright. My parents are from the Midwest. Why would I go to another country? So that is something that I actually, looking back on, I'm extremely grateful for. Resentment about, education aside, because just that's typical, that's reasonable. There being weirdness around class, more so with coming from a background where my mom's a teacher, so not issues of class and being around other sort of wealthier kids was always an issue. That always kind of inspired me to kind of look beyond what I have and what's going on. But then also just it was something that I wasn't very aware of. For me, coming back into it as a conscious choice, I had to do a lot of learning things again as an adult for the first time. Coming through to Judaism at all allowed me to come back to anarchism in the first place, because these things are sort of interrelated for me. first thing that really radicalized me. I like to think of radicalization as a verb. It's like a thing that's ongoing. It's always kind of happening in different ways. And I think the average person has many moments of radicalization. My first one, at least, was the Tree of Life shooting. That's where I had my B'nai Mitzvah. It was sort of this big wake up call of like, oh, there are still fascists here, and history is not just in the books that we read. It's happening, and we're unfortunately a part of it. And that radicalized me and got me to think about fascism, anti-fascism, thinking about the way people think and the way people sort of view the world. And that inevitably kind of led me down both back to like religious observance, quote unquote, and being against the state, being against fascism, being against the state. Now, looking back on it, Jewish history against the state, or Jewish opposition to Zionism, historical Jewish opposition to the idea of there being a Jewish ethno-state, was something also that I was deprived of, that I didn't have access to as growing up, didn't hear about at all. Yiddish, as one of the many Jewish languages. There's Yiddish, there's Ladino, there's Judeo-Arabic, and many Jews haven't heard of.
I feel like you're kind of approaching, and I kind of want to talk about like locating your politics in relation to like Jewish historical memory and religious approach, as well as anarchist and political thought, some of the blending or radicalization in that.
Having a resentful sort of background, being like, I really don't like this, like going around like believing things and talking about sort of like God, very off-putting to me growing up. However, coming upon all this like radical history of like these people who are like, no, I am Jewish and I am this, I'm a political radical, these things inform each other, that helped me sort of come to the realization that belief is not the main thing. Belief is not the most important thing. That's something that Christians really zone in on, and that colors a lot of discourse, political, religious, other sort of people's perceptions of the world. Christianity is very focused on right belief and believing the right thing. Even myself growing up Jewish, like we all exist under the heterosexual capitalist patriarchy. Like we all exist under Christofascism now. Like it's hard not to sort of exist and pick up things by osmosis. Judaism isn't about belief. It's about action. It's about ritual. I met people and I spoke to elders and other activists who were basically helped me realize like they don't go to shul or to synagogue, or they don't do ritual actions because they believe in God. They believe in living an ethical life and doing righteous action. To me, that means, political action, doing the right thing politically. It's not about believing in God. Now I do. That's after a lot of thought. I'm now more predisposed to that kind of stuff. But that's not what it's about. It's about sort of doing the right thing. Anarchism, beyond just being a political philosophy, to myself, I learned a lot from one of my best teachers. My greatest teachers is Cindy Baruch Milstein. They're someone who I've really, really learned a lot from. They came and spent some time in Pittsburgh last year. We organized together and I learned a lot from them. They really sort of helped me see that anarchism, besides being these lists of sort of like ideas and sort of modes of like mutual aid, praxis, doing things ourselves, deciding for ourselves. These are all very concrete things or sort of modes of being, but also anarchism is about having an ethical compass. Not every situation that we come into in organizing is going to be so clear cut. The tension of like, what do we do? Like what is right and what is possible? That's like a normal human tension, right? That's like a normal part of being human and being in relation to each other. That's what anarchism means to me. That's couples very synonymously with this idea of like doing these rituals, doing these sort of like being in community with each other in Jewish ritual spaces. It's about like doing action.
I love that framing of it and of spirituality. It's always been the most relatable to me, and was always what's drawn me the most to Jewish thought, is that I've never been much of a believer, but I will always be willing to talk and argue and get information and put my information in. And all my Jewish anarchist friends, they're like, yeah, you should just convert. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't really it's still, not really there for me, but like we're still where we're at. It's always been something that I've loved from radical religious traditions. Ones that especially the ones that just do their righteous or pious work, and one that doesn't necessitate they're around people at the same level of piety, or even that that hierarchy of piety is anything but expertise and experience. I'm kind of curious, in the zine you quote Mordecai Kaplan, we talk about the pastor get a vote, not a veto. And can you kind of talk more about what that means and reclaiming your Jewish tradition and spirithood and being in ritual spaces and community spaces?
So Mordecai Kaplan, beloved founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, which is this sort of branch of Judaism is about Judaism. His big book was Judaism as Civilization, which is this idea that it's not just Judaism isn't just this selection of prayers and ideas and beliefs. It's also this physical component of the civilization. Reconstructionism is how I grew up. There are many different branches of Judaism. People often joke that all Reconstructionists believe that all Jews are Reconstructionists. Well, you're sort of applying this to all of us, but actually we don't do all of that. But it's there's a plurality within it. But Kaplan's great quote that you pulled out of my zine is, "The past should have a vote, not a veto." The quote, "The past," unquote, should have a say in what we do. We should model ourselves based on things to add to our folkways, our traditions, our rituals based on the past, but we should not limit what we do in our rituals and folkways based on the past. For me, that means reconnecting with all the kinds of Jewish ritual that really modern secular life have done away with again and again. Not so much because I believe that I'm commanded to, or because there's a God who thinks I should. I think the Bible makes way more sense if you read it as literature and metaphor. Sorry, Jewish philosophers figured this out 800 years ago. The Christians are still playing catch up. You spoke earlier about the accessibility in these ritual spaces is good, Jewish ritual spaces. It, I think, is good practice for introduction to radical spaces, politically radical spaces. There's something that with the kinds of Jewish ritual organizing that I do here in Pittsburgh, and we all do. I'm just one person in a collective I organize with Ratzon, which is the Center for Healing and Resistance. We're the Jewish, queer, disabled, anti-zionist collective. And there's all of these people's different approaches. My story of not really liking Judaism and then coming back to it later in life is not unique. It's my personal position is unique, but there's all kinds of variety and how much people engage with it. They really like it, but they just can't learn a new language, or they really want to be around other people. They want to be around other queer, disabled people who are oh yeah, one of the few spaces where people really take masking seriously still. Getting everybody involved in singing, and not everybody singing, but everybody feels better after. Getting everybody and allowing everybody to be prepared in that way, I think is good praxis for political organizing. Everybody's got to try things for themselves. We're all doing this together. We're all making this happen together. Meeting people where they are and accounting for everybody's diverse needs. It's good practice in this ritual space where we're just doing it for regulating our bodies and preparing us for other stuff that we do in other parts of our lives or organizing lives. It's also a good way of practicing no, we have to do this ourselves. We have to figure this out. And if someone's willing to try a little bit, we should let them. We should welcome them in, and at whatever their experience level. On a spirituality level, it's a radical accessibility, spiritual accessibility.
The zine with Teshuva is commonly related. I think talk about in the zine more commonly related with repentance, but you seem to approach it a lot differently. And I'm curious, more a return and ethical turning. I'm kind of curious if you could expound for some of our listeners kind of what Teshuva means to you, how you're exploring it as an anarchist, and kind of in an abolitionist context as well.
My zine Teshuva was a collection of threads of different ideas that I was trying to all present together because I felt really strongly about all of them. Talking about provoking, against these ideas of secular rebellion, of there being radical spaces where nobody can talk about anytime something mystical, or I won't even say religious, but spiritual is brought up, people really sort of shirk and sort of shy away. provocations against the state, an ethic of doing things ourselves, doing Judaism anarchistically or Judeo-punk anarchism. And Teshuva is the word I use for that. Teshuva is a Hebrew word that typically is translated as repentance, but the root of the word means to return. In radical political context, and you can imagine the first thing many people are going to think of when they see return is the giant all capitals, and the U is replaced with a V, like return Western man, the mythical past that never actually really existed, which is a key part of like fascist thought. That's not why I'm using it. The interesting part of it to me is that returning can also be this like returning to an ethical life, returning to traditional Jewish observance, not because I believe in God or because I think that I'm going to go to hell if I don't, or like believe in the concept of ontological concept of sin, but because it's good for me, regulatory to your body, which makes us more powerful, makes us able to act more in changing the world for better. It's a means of connection with our ancestors. There's this idea that as Jews, when we assemble together, you can't just pray by yourself. You can and you should, but the potency of certain prayers only is sort of guaranteed when you're in a community of people. The word is minyan. When you're assembled together in community with 10 Jews, that forms a minyan, and that allows the prayer for morning to sort of go through, to sort of be sanctified. That ethic is really important for when we pray together, when we do all these rituals. I'm not doing it because beliefs, but because when we do, we exist together with all of these people who have done these rituals or these prayers across the axis of time. We're not together in space. We are we're 10 of us over here at this particular date and time, but along the axis of time, in the past, in the future, we are all in community together. That I find really revolutionary and really powerful. And whether or not you're Jewish or Judaism is your thing, I think that's really I think that's really powerful. You can't do this stuff alone. You have to be together in community. It's the same with the ritual for mourning. You're never supposed to be alone when you're grieving somebody close to you has passed away. You're supposed to go out and like not do any work, be around other people. It's this community building aspect that was surrendered at some point, and I think is worth sort of re-examining now, as it's so hard to get together with people. And the other important part of the minyan, when we're together, when we're praying together, doing rituals together, we don't exist together on the axis of space, but we exist together on an axis of time with the 10 of us and everyone who's ever done that prayer in the past and whoever will be in the future. Every time we do Shabbat rituals, every time we mourn and grieve, we do not conquer the realm of space. We exist together in cathedrals of time, as the late great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says. That to me is very radical. This idea of like, that's why I do it. Like it's about getting together and doing stuff that's good for us regulatory wise, like regulating our bodies, allowing us to be more powerful and to take action in other parts of our lives, organizing or otherwise. That's why I do it. That's why I do rituals. That's why I say blessings when I burn a flag. It's because it's like, this connects us to our ancestors and to everybody who's going to come after us. And I think whether or not you're jiving with what I'm saying or you're like into Judaism at all, like these are radical things that I think are worth sharing with everybody, and why it's as an example of like why it's worth examining the religious traditions that we've surrendered, things that have been kept from us because of colonialism, Western capitalism, assimilation, which is related. That's why I do these things, and that's why, like, to me, Teshuva is a radical thing. It can be an abolitionist thing as well, because in our society, there's no good framework for repairing transgressions, whether that's interpersonally or like historically. There is no framework. So Teshuva is the Jewish approach, which is sort of before we do any apologizing, we work on ourselves first, which it's more complicated than that. But that wisdom is what I think is most important to share, is like, you gotta sort of figure out why it was wrong and why you feel bad, and to sort of like center yourself and sort of think about it for a little while before you go and say sorry. Interpersonally, how many times have you ever been in an argument with somebody and you're like, man, I'm sorry you feel that way, but and it just makes it 100% worse? Or for radicals, how many times do we see people who have just learned how awful colonialism is, or have just learned how awful racism is, and they are blundering. They're blundering idiots about it. Their heart's in the right place because their hearts are broken, and they're like, I have to do something. But then they make things worse for themselves or the cause or whatever, like the conditions around them. Like they haven't worked on themselves at all. They're making things worse. That I can think of multiple examples of. I don't know about you.
I'm sure. I mean, do you feel like the zine is an intervention in the Jewish anarchist canon, or where do you see it fitting in?
I wrote Teshuva provocations because I'm in kind of like the anti-zionist Jewish space more broadly. Organizing, we're kind of an anarchist collective, but not everybody who I spoken with a lot of the local organizers for JVP. But like in this space, it's kind of that element of like working to fix transgressions, but not working on ourselves. Not that everybody has to become more religiously observant and start doing rituals, but they could. And I think that's something that would be befitting the anti-Zionist Jewish movement, the movement for solidarity with Palestine and the liberation of occupied Palestine. That would be really helpful because we're struggling. And it's hard not to see, from my positionality, seeing like actions that JVP are doing and the actions that other orgs are doing as being, I don't want to demean them or say that they're not doing enough because I'm only one person and I've only done so much, but the war machine's still ongoing. The genocide's still been ongoing, and an ethic of like anarchism, specifically Jewish anarchism, I think would be way more helpful for anti-Zionist Jews broadly in like, no, we have to know our power. We have to do things ourselves. Hoping that people will be able to see themselves in history as engaging with my Judaism. Assimilation is so tough, and there's so much shame and guilt and generational trauma. Holocaust education in the so-called United States is also a re-traumatizing tool. The bloat of Holocaust education in the U.S. is this effort of remembering this awful Nazi genocide that happened, but also it's furthering the Zionist ethno-nationalist project. Holocaust education is one wing of this sort of framing of history that, no, actually, there's not this multiplicity of history of all these different branches of Judaism. Jews are one people in one place, in one land, with one history, and that history is the Shoah, the Nazi genocide, is the defining event of the Jewish canon. And that's not good. And that's, people are waking up to that more. I did. It's something that's sort of been transformative for me in becoming a radical, becoming an anarchist, becoming dedicated and trying everything to contribute to the end of the genocide and the lifting of the occupation of Palestine. That's what I really hope people will take from the zine, reconsidering their Judaism, not just as like a thing that's for them. It's not just a selfish thing to be Jewish in the midst of genocide being committed by ostensibly the state that says it's the Jewish state in our name, but it's actually a radical thing to be like, no, I can't undo the fact that my ancestors assimilated into whiteness. I can't undo the fact that I benefit from white privilege. But Judaism is this thing it's a way to sort of return to an ethical life against idolatry. And idolatry here meaning not other belief systems or other people who believe differently or pagans or whatever. It's nationalism, ethno-nationalism, fascism, AI, pilot drones. That's what I mean with idolatry. And I think these are the kinds of like meaning frameworks that are available to us for making meaning and trying to sort of imagine a better future that radicals do all the time. Anarchists talk all the time about ancestor worship, and the black bloc. The black bloc is itself a kind of ritual. It's worth consciously engaging in. But it's also, all of this stuff is also why I really liked learning about Black August from y'all. I had never heard of this before, but like the month of rededication, and that's cool as hell. I was like, that's what I think is needed now. Like this.
In abolitionist organizing and work is spiritual as hell. One, the most organized formations inside of prisons in the United States are different sects. That in and of itself colors how all of it goes.
First part of my zine, like really wanting people to not be having such a knee-jerk reaction to spirituality and belief, because it's one way we can make meaning. I think people do because of their own wounds and their own trauma, and also because generally in this occupied land, religion implies Christianity, and Christianity implies empire and hierarchy and gender tyranny and what have you. The kind of secular life that we live in, these things that we are taught to sort of view the world as through secular life, which is itself a sort of mode of colonized settler society, that is all mythology. I'm in a reading group now where we're reading through most of The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber, which is the second time I'm reading it. I read it. That was basically actually like my radicalizing text. Reading the Dugout thing, being like, this is no one's talking about this. This is crazy. But now that I'm reading it a second time, many years later, that book ends on the idea that like all of the stuff with how we perceive the world, how we're taught like the perceiving the world as like Adam and Eve and the garden, exile from the garden, the naturalization of like human nature and like dog eat dog world and capitalism and things have to be this way. That is all sort of mythology of our time. It's not that I want everybody to be Jewish or I want all Jews to become observant again. We're all taught that this is one reality and one history, and we have our own power spiritually. We have the power to make a world where 1,000 worlds fit, and we can do it ourselves. I find that really powerful, and I hope that people do too.
There's so many different ways to view oneness, and you talk about it a lot. You talk about it in the zine, and it kind of reminds me of like, I can't even remember who they were, but like some mathematical philosophers were talking about like infinite pluralistic values inside of a one, and that kind of idea of like the world where many worlds fits versus the dichotomy of oneness from like a more authoritarian or fascist point of view. I don't know, it's like this abuse of unity. Like no matter who's organizing what, whether you're left or right, unity is a theme or a through line throughout history, or like even like authoritarian dictators having the ability to call up 10,000 people to be like, hey, let's do that.
Yeah, it's like, hey, there's only one option and it's doing what I say. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, abusive unity is such a good way to put it. There's this spiritualness, the spiritual view of like oneness, of like everything is interconnected and we're not all discrete, we're not all separate, and like allowing ourselves to come together can be really helpful. And then there's this settler colonial view of reality itself that's passed off as either it's progress, civilization, scientific progress, where, to be clear, I love science. To be clear, I benefit greatly from science. There's been so much human suffering in feeding all the people, humankind's like perspectives into one box, that there is one reality. There's there's only one history and there's only one reality. This isn't even about like there are realities beyond our own. It's about possibility. Unlearning these things of like that there's only one human nature or one, I think the $5 word is ontology. There's only one ontology of like how to see the world. Unlearning that is really powerful because there's oneness itself. Let's go back. I don't know about one infinite values in one, but one philosopher that I do know of is Baruch Spinoza. Earlier this year, I was in this really great anarchist book club where we were reading Spinoza's Ethics. Over a whole year, I had to drop out because I was heartbroken, and that was one of my casualties. His philosophy is like that he logically deducted that God must be real. It's actually some of the least interesting stuff that he wrote about. His whole sort of thing was all of reality is one substance, and all of reality is different components and interrelations of those substances. And whether you call it God or nature is semantics. It's all one. Even our individual bodies are these discrete relations of units that are in relationship with each other. And that I really like and find radical as a sort of like oneness. Because, he was Jewish, he was raised Jewish in the 17th century, but he was also excommunicated. I think also Mordecai Kaplan was excommunicated. Like, it's called the harem, which is the Hebrew word for like heretic. Yeah, he's too cool. People debate exactly why. It probably had to do with the like logically proving that God was real. He got stabbed one time in the coat, and he kept like the stab wound in his coat as like a reminder of his life that he was living. He's a cool guy. That is all very interesting to me because this oneness, if you're coming to it from an atheist perspective, or a perspective where there's not anything supernatural or divine going on in the world, Spinoza's philosophy is radically mystical, right? It's like God is here. God is in the world. God is you and me and the electrons that allow this podcast interview to take place, and everyone listening here, your discrete body parts. This is all part of the one sort of knowing itself. That's radically mystical, which is very interesting. And also just that like the nature of power itself. There's one philosopher who said that power is a set of relations. Spinoza says that power is what our bodies are physically capable of, which I find much more interesting, of like for sort of reflection of like what are we physically capable of doing frees us from what do we imagine as possible. Like, we sort of imagine that all of these things are possible, but what can we really do? That I find very interesting in sort of a philosophy of oneness.
In reframing this mythology, like what does that do to like a divine hierarchy, or like what do you see in that? Because one thing I think about is I was just on this interview with Organic Filament Network, and before they interviewed me, they interviewed this person who talked a lot about piety and hierarchy in a religious formation in Pakistan that they were studying and that they were with for like a couple of years. I wish I could just like regurgitate what he said, and it kind of made me interesting, like what different relationships of like pious or divine hierarchies look like in different like formations of them, how that's been playing out with you.
I think it's a theology that lends itself against hierarchy. The Jewish anarchism that I find myself in and trying to sort of develop and help grow. I grew up in a Reconstructionist synagogue, but also it was all lay people. We didn't have a rabbi. I didn't even realize that until I started going to Ratzon services, and I was like, oh, we're all doing it ourselves? And then made me realize I never had a rabbi growing up. There were rabbis around, because there's the synagogues are so small, they're all like, there's like 4 or 5 of them stuffed in one building. But like that never occurred to me until I started doing this again. Like, this is a kind of theology or like ethics, you could say. If we open up the gates of not everybody can read Hebrew, not everybody can read Yiddish, not everybody can pronounce, like can even like spell it out to be able to spell out the words or know the order of how like ritual services work. I barely do. If we open up this accessibility of like at any level anyone can participate, that's really good practice for sort of the organizing parts of our lives. Nobody knows how to organize a food drive off the bat for the first time. Nobody knows how to organize a fundraiser or a mutual aid fundraiser or a direct action. Like nobody knows how to do that for the first time until they've done it, until they got an experience. The language itself, while people come to it from different languages, it's all about like coming as they are, and the theology of against hierarchy. It's all about language. Not everybody has the time in their daily lives to learn another language, learn another alphabet also, which is difficult as well. But that is possible. Even if materially it's very hard for you, it's hard to make the time, the ancestral languages and reconnecting with that is how we make new meaning. There's an online anti-zionist yeshiva called Shel Mala, where I went and led a Torah for Palestine session where I talked to them about a Teshuva zine, and there's a really great question in there where someone asked about how do we, like, we're Jews for liberation, how do we help indigenous people? Like, some of our ancient texts were destroyed, some and a lot of them were preserved. That's what the Talmud, if you've ever heard of it, this is sort of the collection of oral histories that were like, oh no, we've been ethnically displaced and we've been sent into exile. All of the stuff that we kept orally recorded, we're going to write it down for the first time. We're going to preserve it. This question was like, we did that thousands of years ago. The rabbis did that. How do we help other people do that if they are facing extinction? That was a really good question. So good, I'm still thinking about it. But for me, there are so many peoples across the indigenous peoples or whatever who've lost their mythologies, their beliefs, their spirit, their folkways, and we can't bring those things back. Language acquisition, encouraging people to like reconnect with their ancestral languages and make new meaning with them. That is radical to me. I try to think about that a lot, where I can read the Hebrew alphabet, but it's not something that comes easily to me. But even still, like, I feel this is worth doing. People can be fired from their jobs, people can be repressed by the state, but these things that we learn and like ways that we grow ourselves spiritually, mentally, the things that we learn, that can never be taken away. I find that really important.
There's this connection that I find with a lot of decolonial anarchist practice and like practitioners, is that a lot of it is based around like, how do we create identity, kind of like how you were putting it before, like not space but through time, and especially under this category of like dysphoric anarchist beliefs, of one that is like trying to do like a lot of reclamation but also solidarity work. So I'm kind of curious how that interlays with your community organizing, with like doing like your unlearning assimilation and some of like the tensions around that and community. Like a couple of years ago when doing more Palestine solidarity work, like working with Jewish anarchists who were working with JVP and like local formations, I was going to say not as organized as it seems like y'all are, and like having a much different, clearer, like someone that's holding like anti-zionist rituals or something like that, like outside of like homes. a lot of them were like asking questions about like how do they do that unlearning, assimilation, and like dealing with generational trauma, different grief in the family. Of people don't talk about how they came or when they came, or through like different family traditions, or they bleed or lie about them. So like even when we're in community, it gets even more distorted and harder to work through, especially when working through all these extra barriers of trying to then organize people around a genocide, but then just doing like cultural work, religious work, that folks are interested in doing as anti-authoritarians. I feel like that's something that folks have asked me about, and I'm always like, oh no, you should just like make another group and make another meeting. And me, I'm an anarchist. I always say make more meetings.
One more assembly. Just one more assembly, guys.
Then you invite people there, and then I don't know. After that, like Rances thing comes to your mind.
I always really appreciate organizing with Arab and Muslim folk. There isn't a huge... I wish we had greater connections with local Arab and Muslim communities here in Pittsburgh. We do, and we have, and we've organized. But it's something that I always feel strongly that we have more in common with Muslims and Arabic people of different backgrounds. We have more in common with them than like the jackboot thugs in occupied Palestine. But like I always try, when we're organizing, not getting too caught up in that. Part of my unlearning process was sort of reading about Islamic history and mysticism and just like finding it very interesting and finding it compelling. And finding out that the history of this fake history of like Jews only lived in Europe and they were not very welcome in Arab Muslim lands was not true. In fact, there was more than 900 or so years of Jewish Muslim coexistence in places like North Africa, Iraq, and Iran, and Syria. And those like wings of the diaspora were destroyed by colonialism. Algeria, for example, there used to be a Jewish community in Algeria when Rome was still a republic, but then it was destroyed first by French colonialism, and then the death blow was dealt by Zionist colonialism. That's just one example. This is so important, but also Jews and Muslims getting along is not the issue with what's going on in Palestine. I feel really strongly about that personally. On a political level, I'm like, that's not the whole point. The whole point is it's settler colonialism. The quote-unquote Israeli state is the forward operating base of the United States empire. Focusing on that is really important. But just trying to do like inviting people, having sort of cross collaborations, being like, hey, we're doing this, we're doing that. Last year at the first prayer vigil for the first anniversary of October 7th. I wasn't involved in organizing it. I just showed up. There was a really great interfaith solidarity where we got together at a park at sunset, and we, like a crowd of Jews and a crowd of Muslims, we did the Mariv and the Maghreb prayers when the sun went down. And it was powerful. It was really meaningful to myself and a lot of people. Interfaith collaboration and solidarity, really important. And I really, really quite like in doing organizing, whether it's for spiritual reasons or political reasons or both. I keep saying both of these at the same time, not because they're separate, but because they're both two facets of the same issue to me. In doing all this organizing, we're fostering a theology or an ethic of being against hierarchy, but also we're forming like counter institutions. All of the stuff I do is like self-organized, and it's very kind of like scrappy. Because we're anarchists and we're all queer and we're all poor. But like institutions are not safe for us. Jewish institutions don't have places for us because they've been captured by Zionist settler colonial allegiance. There were decisions were made before I was born many, many years ago to have American and Israeli flags on the bima, on the altar, or on the high place. These are sort of decisions that were made, the ramifications of which only now, like generations later, we're really beginning to understand here as Jewish Americans that unfortunately the people in occupied Palestine have been dealing with for 77 years now. And so forming counter institutions, like doing things ourselves, being a thorn in the side of people who claim to speak for us, is really important. And that's kind of why I started organizing the Zine Fest. One, because I went to the Anarchist book fair in Asheville, and I was so like blown away. I was like, I had been doing anarchism for a little while, but like I became an anarchist in Asheville. Like I really fell in love with the place. People were so wonderful. I was like, I want to do that here. And then also it's the Jewish Zine Fest. People were really kind of buck of like, why you're doing a religious Zine Fest? What sense does that make? But it's about these ethics of like doing the right thing and organizing ourselves that I've mentioned. But also, if we're not going to go and do direct actions and tear down the walls of these Jewish institutions that are helping to finance the genocide in Palestine, then at least we're going to spit in the face of them. That's the least we can do, right? After the first year's Zine Fest, there was Pittsburgh's first ever Jewish book festival, and it's in the building where I did Jewish preschool and where there's a synagogue there. I looked at all of the programming they have for it, and it's all like imagining war with Iran. And this was like last November. So it's like imagining the future of Judaism, and it's all like Israeli centered stuff and like science fiction novels about fighting cloned Hitler. Like it's crazy. And I'm like, why is this Jewish preschool? Yeah.
Like I want to get this book. I'm not gonna lie. That sounds about Disney. I love really interesting fascist, anti-fascist novels. It's like American. They're so easy to do. It's like almost every spy media.
This is your imagination is foaming at the mouth about when a war with Iran's finally going to happen. And it did. And it finally, 30 years of geopolitics later, Israel did an unnecessary and unprovoked firebombing of Iran, and what good that's done for the Jewish people and for Jewish safety worldwide, or the people who live in that part of town. It's tough. So it's very heartbreaking to see these like places where they're like, this is where I went to preschool, or this is where I went and did Hebrew school. And it's like, oh, they are part of the problem, and not just supporting a different president than me or whatever, or supporting different politicians. It's like, no, they're part of the wider settler colonial apparatus. It doesn't seem that way. And it seems crazy to what institutions spend their money on is important. And these things have no democratic say.
It also doesn't seem so crazy because we live in a settler colony ourselves. The logic that it's based off is very similar in that way, which is why you can't have Americans looking at it like that way. It's got to be a religious context. It's the forever war. I mean, come on, what are we going to do? When I figured out that that's what we're calling the complex thing in the Middle East for years, the question, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I was like, okay. Well, I mean, it wasn't that easy to study, but I was like,
it's complicated to unlearn it, and all of this, there's so much studying that can be done. Yeah, you're like, oh, y'all are debating a question. There's a group of people who you've got the word question after. That's crazy.
It's always peculiar. 75% of the time, never a good conversation. What other interventions you see to build off recognizing that anarchist ethical and spiritual dimension outside of something that's the settler secularism that you were talking about earlier, about how that's how it's thought of, even though it is very our secularism is very based off Christian mythology, and even political secularism, we have their face in mountains. Very much so, the pantheon is right there, and the way we have these talks around folks. I mean, I see it happens sometimes in anarchist circles, but this conversation around ritual and labor, as you were talking of it, I'm kind of curious how that expands or what that makes up in your mind.
Focusing on a decolonial Judaism is really important. There's been some debates I've had with some comrades, other Jewish anarchists, about whether or not to use the term anti-zionist Jew. The sort of the good faith argument back and forth is if you're defining your Jewishness by being against the state, it's really hard to imagine, but Baruch Hashem, by God, we will outlive Zionism. We will outlive the state of Israel. We will outlive empire and settler society. But getting to that point of defining yourself by that, when it's over, hopefully within our lifetimes, may it be so, then what are you building? Obviously, the immediate sort of triage is trying to build solidarity and building against the genocide in Palestine and liberating Palestine and a free democratic society there and the end of the war machine. But also, what kind of Judaism are we building as we go along through this process? And anyone could ask that. Muslim comrades are thinking very seriously about what kind of world are we building as we are acting in opposition to the American empire. I really like Dr. Muhammad Abdu's writings on the stuff. So wonderful. Figuring out, going through our mythologies, our our ancient texts, like reconnecting with that language, making new meaning with Jewish languages. Because talking about what kind of stuff we're building, Zionism is poison. Not only has it been abusing and obliterating the Palestinian people, it also has been poison to all of the Jewish people who have been, through the fiat of history, have been conscripted as foot soldiers in the Middle East and don't even think of it themselves that way. Yiddish is a language that was repressed by the state of Israel. The Jewish languages, Yiddish and Ladino and the many, many branches of Judeo-Arabic, they were all repressed in the name of one people in one place and in one land with one history. Connecting with those things, experimenting with, for me, I have European ancestry, so I connect with Yiddish, but like, we're trying to connect with Yiddish, going through the bones of our traditions in order to like find where the votes are to allow our past to have a vote is really important for me. And it's something that I think many people from many places can really could benefit from in radical spaces. Like, not only do we have to figure out how to end the war machine and tear down the American empire and the settler colonial occupation of Palestine, like, what are we building and what are we sort of breathing life into? What sacredness is there that we have access to, that we can interface with, that we can sort of focus on and use to our benefit while also we are tearing things down?
What helps you stay grounded when you're in more mass organizing spaces as a decolonial anarchist, having this decolonial Jewish identity with the different tensions that arise? What guides you in those spaces? Does it guide you to those spaces?
It does. I always try and ground myself in meeting people where they are and trying my damnedest to be gentle. Everyone, when we're coming together organizing, we have these different holdovers from the old world that we've been raised in that we're trying to slough off and try and surrender as we get together and build something new. That doesn't mean that we should ignore interpersonal conflict, seek out and challenge, like gender tyranny or whatever, in our organizing spaces, but also meeting people where they are is really important. It makes me really sad when I go to organizing spaces or radical spaces and people are like having a very intense reaction to talking about singing. I always kind of like try and like ground myself singing, or we're always singing tunes. Some comrades of mine, we held a banner in the May Day parade and we were singing songs, and that was really nice. But also just like seeing people were into it, but also they were sort of like, what are they doing? You know. It's all about trying to regulate our bodies. So much of this is so difficult. The ancestral tools that we have, which are sort of surrender to like religiosity and surrender to like reactionaries. You see somebody is religious and you assume that a fair bet in the right wing. It doesn't have to be so. It doesn't have to be so. And there are these things that colonialism has taken from us that capitalism tries to sell back to us. Therapizing and all sorts of stuff for like self-care and mindfulness, where it's like, oh my god, no, like we have to figure, there has to be something else. That's why I gravitate towards this,
because that sounds like some of that spark of like why we need to build our own institutions and do that, and like you were saying, build those spaces where they're not all right ring, which kind of brings it talking more about like the Jewish Anarchist Fest and kind of what sparked that and some of the folks that you organized that with, and what that first fest was like and kind of what came out of it.
I'm so excited. The first year, I organized it all by myself, which I do not recommend. It's a very bad idea. But I was so excited.
Well, I did one with like 5 people, and we almost got that. We barely got that done.
And to be fair, the first year was very small, like 50 people came. The big idea is not a big bookstore. It was the big idea and the area directly in front of it on the street. It was very small, but I was like, I'm so excited. I want to try organizing an anarchist thing myself. I had 2 months to do it. I got the idea for the Jewish Zine Fest because there's a Jewish zine archive in so-called Tucson, Arizona. I happened to have put out a call of like, hey, we're doing this in Arizona. You should do it too. Here's, you should be inspired and do the same thing. And I was like, yup, exactly. I'm seeing signs. I simply have to act on them. So it was very stressful, but I don't regret doing it because we raised like $200 for Operation Olive Branch. I printed out a bunch of zines. People were having heard of it, they couldn't make it, but they were emailing me like, "Hey, I heard you're doing this thing. Here's the spreads for my zine. Please include it to help raise money." There were people who were walking down off the side of the street who were like, "What the hell is this?" And it was all very, very positive. And in the first year, we had 2 talks, which is also crazy. I gave a talk about zines being discursive and how Jewish texts themselves are very discursive and how those things are related. My friend and comrade Dade Lemansky, who's also in the organizing committee for this year, working on publishing a book on Yiddish poetry in Appalachia. And so they came in, did a talk. It was like a chapter from their book they were working on that they like didn't make the cut. They're like, "Oh, great. Here, this is perfect for a talk." You should never do it alone, but organizing is all about relationships. I rely on relationships to make it happen. Knowing people at the radical bookstore, knowing the game store down the street. They let me borrow their overhead tent, which is great because it sprinkled the first 30 minutes. So that was key. There's an organizing collective. It's me and several really cool people, Dade and my friend Ren, who organizes like a local anti-zionist shiur, which is the word for a text study. Base Laka should happen. It's like we sat and did like yeshiva work on like the anti-zionist text of our tradition. We spent like 6 hours studying one page of text that's preserves a bunch of rabbis arguing whether it's legal or ethical to move back to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, which is very interesting. And Lou and Eli, and so we've got a collective now. And we're having
a workshop of that.
Out of that study. I definitely will, because it's something that I'm studying and doing some writing on. I just haven't gotten back to it yet. But we'll definitely at some point we'll talk more about Ketubot 111a, which is that page of Talmud. Can I go on a 5-minute tangent about Anti-zionist Talmud?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sitting for 6 hours and pouring through dictionaries, is crazy, but it was so much fun. We all had study partners, like 12 queer Jews coming together in theater space, and they're doing the stuff that's theoretically gatekept behind like institutions and access to wealth. We did it ourselves. I really enjoyed it. The thing with this one page of Talmud preserving arguments about moving back to Eretz Israel, there's a rabbi talking to his student, and this teacher is trying to convince his student, you shouldn't go back to Eretz Israel. And the student's like, "Oh, but it's so great over there." The teacher is like kind of forlorningly trying to convince his student, "No, I'll miss you." It's this very like yearning thing. It ties back to the Song of Songs as the like proof text. The argument is that this is referred to as the 3 oaths, which is this idea that Jews across the diaspora, across the world, should not move back to Eretz Israel because 3 oaths were sworn when Jews were in Eretz Israel, and like I think when they were going into exile, and those 3 oaths are relating to like I'm not going to be able to remember all of them off the top of my head, but the one that's the most interesting is that you should not go as a wall. You can move to Eretz Israel; it's ethical and it's legal, but yourself. You cannot, like the Jewish people cannot go as a wall, which is very interesting because the one of the earliest Zionist thinkers is this was this fascist guy named Ze'ev Jabotinsky, the guy who founded the Beitar the Beitar football guys are students of his thought. His text about like settling the land and taming it with strong desert Jews was called The Iron Wall. And he was like, we're going to go, and the only way, we've learned from the American settler colony, like the only way that we can subjugate these peoples is by strong military force. It's more important to know how to shoot a gun than to speak Hebrew. Those are things that Ze'ev said. That Zionist text being hearkening back to like, it's okay for one person to go back to Eretz Israel, because there have always been Jews, like the idea that Jews were fully exited out of Palestine, and then the state of Israel was like reclaiming that and coming back. That itself is part of the myth building project of the Zionist state. There have always been Jews in Palestine, in Eretz Israel. They don't look like the Jews that came there in the 20th century who had assimilated into European colonialism. But There always were Jews. The earliest centers of Jewish thought were both in Babylonia and in Palestine. Many of the ancient Israelites and ancient Judeans that never left just were some of the ancient peoples that that form the ancestors of the Palestinian people. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's
And our relationship to empires, cities, nation states is completely different than it was a couple thousand, even 100 years ago.
it's crazy. Like, we're so divorced from the idea that if you're oppressed, you can just get up and go somewhere else. Under global capitalism and like the violence of borders, we've completely lost the imagination that like if someone oppresses us, we can just go, we can just leave. Whether it's the Jewish diaspora or like other people's, like the freedom to sort of remove oneself and go is something that's like central to human liberty. Like the ability to just deny, like, no, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm going to go do my own thing. Like, that has been taken away for so long that we can scarcely even imagine a world where I don't like what America's doing to me, I'm getting up and I'm leaving. That's still physically possible. These things are tied behind money and resources and class and the enforcement of the maintenance of every border and its violence, et cetera, et cetera. And so like that's one thing of like re-examining like why learning history is important. Studying ancient texts, I think, is important for the now of like doing political action of like, it's all about imagining. If we could see how different things were in the past, we can imagine how different things can be now and in our future.
In doing all that study and also being a part of that living tradition and creating these zines and essays and these physical spaces, how is that, or like zine making specifically, become like a form of ritual that feels like important culturally in that way, or of resistance or something like that way?
I do. I think for me, making zines started as being like, I feel really strongly about something and I want to communicate about it. I'm both trying to share something really that's I'm learning about is really new, and also like I'm in the process of like making a physical thing. I'm also like capturing some of the energy of this moment in time of like, I'm also, as I'm trying to teach someone about this, I'm also I'm learning, and I'm also unlearning something as well. Zines are really important. It's really fun because the Jewish tradition, there's this very like, Jewish people were some of the first people to ever have printing presses. There's these traditions of Jewish people making their own booklets for Passover, for doing their own like theatrical performances of the ritual. Beyond that, the historical connection as well. So much of our attention and time is taken up with the internet and social media, to the point where like some people even feel watching movies takes a lot of focus. Being able to pour your heart out into a physical object and somebody to take that, if somebody takes it, if you get to a point where somebody's taking your zine and is reading it earnestly, that is such a more powerful factor for changing their mind, enabling them to realize their own power. Because nobody reads zines to say that they have. Everybody's read books to say they have, or watch movies to say that they have. Nobody
Didn't need to read Desert, who read Desert unnecessarily. Oh, no,
right? It's like, I didn't need to watch Megan 2. I can say that I did. I really didn't need to watch Megan 2. But like, nobody's reading Blessed is the Flame to say that they did. They're reading it to try and be like, okay, I really gotta have my mind changed. or they're open to it. So I find that really powerful. The ritual of like creating a physical object. It's very tactile. Like I started making zines completely on the computer. Do not recommend. Old fashioned's the best way to learn. X-Acto knife and glue stick and photocopier. It's empowering. It's liberating to be able to be like, self-publishing is liberating. Maybe I'm not making a lot of money doing this. It's if you're looking to make money, zines is not the answer.
even though with zine influencers I know are like, here's how I make money on my shop with t-shirts, because I'm also a screen printer, because you can't make money off zines. Zines are not the money.
If your zine string pays the bills, it's because you're also a screen printer and a social media influencer and a marketer, and you make graphics. it's empowering, and it's I love doing it. I think everybody should make zines, even if it's not something very lofty and high-minded of like unlearning, keeping ourselves aware of the settler colonial society that we live in, and navigating within that. Just making a zine is itself a radical act. Engaging in exchange of information is really important, and it's going to become more important as state repression ramps up, as social media becomes less and less reliable. The control of the levers of information like goes into even fewer and fewer hands. You don't have to put your name on the zine. You want to say some really crazy stuff about what you think should happen to executives of various different industries. You can share that with people, and you don't have to put your name on it. And I think that's something that like younger people, especially as well, like my age and old and younger, they've only lived in a social media world as adults, and they just don't know that like you don't have to sort of surveil yourself and put yourself online so much. Use social media as a tool. I use it as a tool to like share things, and consciously I try to use it as little as possible.
But every tool has its limit, and we have to know that.
Every tool has its limit, and social media is a tool that wants you to keep using it, benefits from you using it more, despite the fact that the job has been done 5 minutes ago, and you're watching reels of people showing you how to make money off of zines, which means learning 3 other hobbies.
So with this second Zine Fest, what intentions do you feel like you're carrying into the space? Are there like different talks happening this year and different groups coming in involved? New space, you said?
The second Zine Fest is happening at the Mr. Roboto Project, which is a DIY sort of punk music venue. They're super welcoming. They're super wonderful. Roboto's been around for like decades. The Roboto Collective are so welcoming that rhetoric, the Jewish collective I'm in, is just like sharing space with them. It's super nice. We're only having one talk this year, and we're having it online, both to sort of like not let me keep myself in the trap that I got myself into last year, and also like we wanted to have it be accessible to people who aren't in Pittsburgh, who physically aren't here and can't make it, but want to attend. Like people love attending stuff remotely, so we're gonna have our one big talk Saturday, August 30th, the night before the Zine Fest. That's gonna be I'm really privileged. I'm gonna be able to interview Cindy Baruch Milstein, comrade, teacher of mine. I'm lucky to call them a friend, even though they made the fateful decision to flee the country and not stay in the so-called United States with the rise of Christo-fascism. But they've been hard at work. They're an educator and an organizer, have published many edited collections, but also they've been hard at work making zines too. They've been publishing a collection of zines. There's like collections of writing from various different peoples. I have entries in several of them. Anarchist Compass, Everyday Anti-Fascism, Ritual as Resistance. It's really cool. And so I'm going to get to interview them for an hour about zines and editing collections and putting anarcho-feminism into practice. I'm really excited for that. That's going to be wonderful because I miss Cindy dearly. The first year was kind of a faux thing where I just put out lots of zines we're destroying for donations. We've got 11 people signed up to do tabling. There's a really, really cool collection of zinesters and like crafters, many of which are local, many of which are coming from out of town. It's going to be so exciting. The Zine Fest itself is Sunday, August 31st, 12 to 5. The end of the day, we're going to have a musical performance around 4:30 by local noise artist 7D, who's super, super cool. I don't want to give away too many details because they're still in development, but it's going to be a free event. It's masks required. There's going to be a space out back if anyone needs to take a mask off for a sec or drink water. We're also going to be accepting donations. All of like the Zine Fest merch that we're going to have merch. All of the official merch table, we're all collecting money for Gaza Soup Kitchen. Any of the money that we're raising, we're giving to mutual aid in occupied Palestine, help keep people fed. Trying to focus on raising money for mutual aid groups, specifically, practically, of our money. The money that we're raising shouldn't go to like nonprofits can't be trusted.
After the Zine Fest, or is there any way for folks to interact with getting either involved with that kind of work or accessing that merch?
Yeah. I'm sure with whatever merch we'll have left over, we'll do like an online drive to clear us out and to raise more money. Keep your eyes peeled for shirts and patches and zines and bookmarks. If you've liked listening to me ramble about my favorite topics, I can be found on Instagram, cursed Instagram at Stormbringer Press. If you want to get involved in the Jewish ritual organizing that we do, come to Ratzon Kabbalat Shabbat. Follow us on social media at Ratzon. We have a newsletter where we share all of the events and all of the like the blossoming community stuff that we have going on. Come to a Kabbalah Shabbat, come to a thing and participate, and that's the best way to get involved. I'm really, really fortunate that we've got a lot of really cool media going on, a really cool community going on. Really grateful to share with a lot of people.
How do you feel like this journey, organizing and finding community in all these different frameworks has like affected your thoughts around like family?
It's almost certainly improved my attitude to family towards the better. The whole like radicalization process and coming back to like more observant Jewish life has put things a lot in perspective for me. The past 5 years of the pandemic have done that too. This idea of like finding chosen family and like making intentional familial relationships with like found family with queer organizers and stuff, that's been huge. It's been life-changing. That makes me think of one of the sources that I quoted in my zine, this writer Joy Layden, who's a trans Jewish woman. She wrote that being trans and being Jewish are actually very similar experiences. For her, it's coming home to ancestors, reconnecting with elders, connecting to our past, an identity that is wildly different dependent upon context. For me, playing at being Jewish, which was possible because there's this ethic of like, it's a thing you got to do. Like you could show up, but also there's these things to do and learn and participate in. Playing at being Jewish was life-saving for me, life-altering, because it also, like being around other radical queer people, also let me try out being trans for the first time. Having access to ancestral languages. My chosen Hebrew name is Anastasia, Bat Lilith. Bat means daughter of. I was able to like gender myself as feminine for the first time using these ancestral languages. So that's something that's very important to me. Improved my connection to family. I've only got so much time left in this world, and we've only got each other. Finding chosen family, loving bonds, not romantic love, but like loving bonds with so many people has only ever improved my life, made me stronger, and helped me reconnect with blood family that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Is there anything that you really want the readers of Teshuva or any other Jewish anarchists coming up into their own to kind of carry on with them after reading some of your work?
I want you to know that no matter how much shame you feel reconnecting with things that you've tried to leave behind, or shame you feel, you're like, am I not good enough? Am I Jewish enough? Am I this enough? Am I that enough? You are enough. There's so much work that needs to be done. It's overwhelming to imagine the scope of terror and darkness that's set to devour our world if we stand still. But we're not obligated to finish all of the work that has been left to us. Even still, we are not obligated to let it fall to the wayside. We don't have to do everything, but we've got to do something. And that's what I would really hope people would take away from this, is that you have the power to change yourself and to grow and help yourself become a better person, a more well-regulated person, a more dangerous, loving person. And I think if we can transform ourselves, we can transform the world.
What questions are you sitting with after writing it?
So doing the research for the zine and thinking about like radical, like anarchist sort of revolutionary people's relationship to spirituality and mysticism, I've been left with this sort of curiosity of like, we actually, as anti-Zionist Jews, we have a lot in common with liberation theologists. In the name of religion, there's all these atrocities being done, and they're still persevering and iterating on their sacred texts. So I'm wondering how that can be connected, I'm wondering how we can like earnestly share these things. I share a lot about the Jewish mysticism because I love it and I think it's compelling enough to share, but also there are a lot of Western occult traditions that rampantly stole from Judaism in the formation of their traditions. And so I'm always left with these questions of how do we learn from each other earnestly and honestly, but also not like doing the abusive unity of like coming and being like, no, this that the Western perennialists like to do all the time of like, I'm going to take this from Zen and this from Sufi Islam and blah, 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 blah. We have to be responsible for each other's learning. That's a question I've really been left with after this of like, how do we do that effectively, collaboratively? how do we come together and sort of learn from each other in order to sort of transform our own traditions and sort of grow without like being like, what do you think? What can I borrow from your radical tradition? Where it's how do we be in community literally in a material way and also spiritually?
Yeah, thank you. Is there any other thing you want? Last remarks? Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. These are all my things that I love talking about. I hope everybody enjoyed how nervous I was at the beginning. It's so hard being aware of how much darkness there is in the world, or how broken everything is. This year, I've been trans for a long time, but this year I began to sort of do hormone replacement therapy. There's never a great time to transition. This is an especially not great time, especially bad time. Even still, do not regret it. Only regret is not doing it sooner. It's so overwhelming to see like all of these things, how bad things are and how bad things are probably going to get. But in Yiddish, we have there's this expression, "Mir wollen sie überleben." Apocryphally comes from this story of during the Nazi genocide, there were a bunch of Germans who had a bunch of Jews up against the wall, and they were like, sing a song as they were getting ready to shoot them. After singing a couple songs that the Germans didn't like, they just sort of danced and cheered and said, "We will outlive, wir wollen sie überleben, wir wollen sie überleben." And that's the rallying cry of radical Yiddishist anti-zionists to this day. It's so hard to imagine a better world, but the state can repress us as radicals, as trans people. There have always been trans people. There will always be trans people. We will outlive them. We will outlive the state repression. And for trans people, for anarchists, for Jewish radicals, what have you, we not only have to like survive to make the world better and to leave a better world, we also have to survive to be the elders that future generations so desperately need. I haven't had any access to any like movement elders until recently, and that was life-changing, even just one. And that's something that I think is really important, and I think is worth living for.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to get to talk about my favorite things.
Honored to have you on.
Our podcast is a tool for learning, and we're taking it further on Patreon. By supporting us, you'll gain access to exclusive reading episodes where we unpack key texts and ideas, plus early access to interviews with radicals and revolutionaries. Your contribution helps to make these resources more accessible and impactful. Visit patreon.com/the Dugout Pod to support our work.
Right now in Sudan, anarchist comrades are organizing in the middle of a war, repression, and displacement. The anarchist group in Sudan is building mutual aid, grassroots committees, and political education for survival and liberation. And they need our support. You can stand with them by making a one-time donation, holding your own fundraiser and sending the funds to the Open Collective, Support Sudanese Comrades, link in bio, or become a monthly supporter at that same Open Collective link. Every contribution strengthens their ability to keep resisting and caring for their people. Solidarity means action. Tap the link in our bio or in the show notes and support the anarchist group in Sudan today.